When my husband's heart stopped, my world completely shattered. Standing in the freezing rain beside his open grave, I held my phone with shaking hands, waiting for my mother to walk up and comfort me. Instead, my screen lit up with a video notification. It was a live broadcast of my sister's extravagant birthday bash, complete with champagne, laughing relatives, and my mom singing at the top of her lungs. When I finally called her in tears, asking how she could skip her son-in-law's funeral for a party, she leaned into the microphone and said something so unbelievably cold, it turned my grief into ice. Everyone watching thought I was going to break down and surrender. But 6 months later, one single phone call turned the tables, bringing my mother to her knees when she realized the catastrophic mistake she'd made. Follow my story to the very end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my voice has reached. My name is Clara, and at 28 years old, I never imagined I would have to bury my husband. Mark was 32 when his heart gave out without warning, leaving my world shattered into jagged pieces. In the days leading up to today, I clung to the hope that my family would rally around me, offering the basic comfort a grieving widow desperately needs. Instead, reality struck like a physical blow on the very morning of the memorial. I stood alone in the hallway of our home, clutching the handwritten eulogy to my chest, when my phone buzzed against my palm. I pulled it out, expecting a comforting message, a sudden change of heart, or an offer to ride to the chapel. Instead, it was a cold text from my mother. It read, "Today is your sister's birthday party. We can't come." Just like that, my own flesh and blood erased my existence. They chose a frivolous celebration, cake, and balloons over the final farewell of the man I loved with every breath in my body. When I walked into the chapel, the front row was devastatingly empty. I sat there in total solitude, the heavy silence pressing down on my shoulders as the funeral director gently nudged me to begin. As I looked out at the vacant seats meant for the people who raised me, something inside me shifted completely. I realized then that my family's selfishness ran far deeper than simple neglect, setting the stage for absolute betrayal. 2 days after the funeral, the overwhelming silence in my house felt almost suffocating. Just as I was gathering the strength to piece my life back together, my phone rang with my mother's name on the screen. For a brief, naive second, I thought she might finally offer an apology, or at least ask if I was surviving. But the moment I answered, her voice was sharp, laced with cold indifference. She didn't ask how I was doing. Instead, she scoffed and said, "You are always a drain on this family, Clara, and Mark left you with nothing. Don't expect us to carry your weight now that he's gone." Before I could even process the cruelty of her words, she hung up, leaving me standing in the middle of Mark's quiet study, tears burning my eyes. Anger replaced my sorrow. I needed to focus on practical reality. I began sifting through Mark's desk to organize his personal affairs, expecting only mountain-high medical bills and modest savings accounts. But at the back of the bottom drawer, hidden behind old tax records, my fingers brushed against cold metal. It was a heavy, locked steel box. Taped to the bottom was a small brass key. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, revealing a thick folder filled with official legal documents stamped by a private estate attorney I had never heard of. As I scanned the pages, my breath caught in my throat. Mark wasn't just a struggling freelance web designer, as my mother always condescendingly claimed. He had been quietly managing something massive behind the scenes, a secret that was about to turn my entire world upside down. The next morning, I found myself sitting in a sleek downtown office, staring across a polished mahogany desk at Arthur Vance, Mark's private estate attorney. Mr. Vance adjusted his glasses, looking at me with genuine sympathy before opening a thick manila folder. "Mrs. Miller," he began gently, "your husband was an extraordinarily forward-thinking man. He knew his family dynamic was complex, so he took meticulous steps to secure your future." What he revealed next completely blew me away. 2 years ago, Mark had quietly patented a revolutionary logistics optimization software. Instead of making a public spectacle of it, he had sold the licensing rights to a major tech conglomerate for millions. He took those proceeds and built a diversified, private investment portfolio completely under a private trust designed solely for me. But the biggest bombshell was yet to drop. Mr. Vance pulled out a commercial property deed and slid it toward me. Mark didn't just invest in stocks, Clara. He bought the entire commercial building downtown, the exact location where your mother's luxury event planning company operates. I stared at the deed in total shock. My mother had bragged for years about securing a master lease in that prime downtown building, constantly using her business status to look down on Mark and me. She had no idea that Mark had quietly bought out the property owner 6 months ago. He had left me with absolute ownership, complete financial independence, and total control over the very ground my mother's business stood on. She thought Mark had left me with nothing, but in reality, he had given me the keys to her entire empire. 3 months passed after Mark's death, and during that entire time, not a single member of my family called to check on me. But on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my doorbell rang persistently. I opened the door to find my mother standing on the porch, flanked by my younger sister, Chloe. They didn't offer a hug or even ask how I was coping with my grief. Instead, my mother pushed her way past me into the foyer, shaking off her umbrella and looking around with a sneer. "It's about time you opened up," she said, pulling a folded legal document from her designer handbag. Chloe sat on my sofa, crossing her legs with an air of complete arrogance. My mother set the paper on the dining table and tapped it aggressively with her manicured fingernail. "Look, Clara, we know you're struggling to keep this house without Mark's meager income. You've been wallowing here for 3 months, and it's getting ridiculous." She went on to explain that Chloe wanted to expand her boutique business, but they needed capital immediately. Their grand solution was for me to sell my home, hand over 60% of the proceeds to fund Chloe's venture, and move into a small, rented studio apartment nearby. When I stared at her in sheer disbelief, my mother laughed, calling me selfish for holding on to sentimental junk while my sister was trying to build a real future. She assumed I was desperate, helpless, and completely out of options. I felt a cold, calm wave wash over me. I didn't yell or shed a single tear. Instead, I quietly pulled out my phone, pressed record, and let them lay out every single arrogant demand on tape. I calmly picked up the document my mother had tossed onto the table, folded it in half, and slid it back across to her. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "What do you think you're doing, Clara?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You don't have the luxury of turning down our help." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "I don't need your help, Mom, because I'm not selling my house, and I'm certainly not funding Chloe's business." Before she could launch into another cruel tirade, I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out an official document bearing the seal of Vance and Associates, along with a formal legal notice. I set it down directly on top of her contract. "Since you're so concerned with business," I said, my voice steady and unwavering, "you should read this. As of 3 months ago, Mark's estate acquired the commercial property downtown. That means I am now your landlord." The color completely drained from my mother's face. Chloe sat up straight, her arrogant composure instantly vanishing. I continued, explaining that her company's master lease was up for renewal at the end of the month, and due to multiple past due maintenance fees her business had ignored, I was officially issuing a notice of non-renewal and immediate lease restructuring. The very venue that kept her elite event business alive was now under my total control. The arrogant smirk on my mother's face transformed into sheer, unadulterated panic as she realized that the daughter she had abandoned held her entire financial livelihood in her hands. Within less than an hour of my mother and Chloe practically running out of my house, my phone exploded. It wasn't just a missed call or two. It was a relentless barrage of frantic ringtones, text messages, and agonizing voicemails from every corner of my family. My mother left 6 messages in a row, her tone spiraling from explosive rage to breathless, desperate begging. Relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years were suddenly popping up in my notifications, trying to guilt-trip me into acting like family and showing mercy. They pleaded with me not to destroy my mother's business, claiming that family always forgives and moves past conflicts. But as I listened to their hysterical voices, I felt remarkably unshakable. I waited until the next morning, picked up the phone, and called my mother back. When she frantically answered, gasping out apologies and promising they would make things right, I stopped her in her tracks with a calm, deliberate voice. "Do you remember what you told me 2 days after Mark died, Mom?" I asked. The line went dead quiet. "You told me I was a drain on this family and that Mark left me with nothing. You told me not to expect your help. I'm simply following your advice and standing on my own 2 feet." I didn't back down. Within weeks, without her prestigious downtown location, my mother's high-profile clients panicked and canceled their contracts, forcing her to downsize significantly and face massive financial embarrassment. Chloe's ambitious project collapsed before it even started, leaving them both to reap the bitter harvest of the cruelty they had sown. With the weight of my family's toxic expectations finally lifted from my shoulders, I was finally able to grieve Mark in peace. Using a significant portion of the wealth Mark had secured for us, I established the Mark Miller Foundation, a charitable trust dedicated to offering financial support, legal guidance, and counseling to young widows navigating sudden loss. Helping other women rebuild their lives from the ashes brought a deep, healing purpose to my own pain. Looking back, I realized that true family isn't defined by shared blood or empty obligations, but by genuine love, loyalty, and how people show up for you during your darkest hours. I survived the storm, reclaimed my strength, and built a future Mark would be proud of. Now, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. If you were in my shoes, would you have given them a second chance? Or did my family get exactly what they deserved? Comment below with the city or country you're watching from, and let me know how you would have handled it.